Elijah Cross stood across the street from his own luxury store on Fifth Avenue, the crisp autumn wind tugging gently at the brim of his baseball cap. He pulled it lower, hiding more of his face as the city moved around him, horns blaring, heels clacking, the distant echo of saxophone from a nearby cafe. No one passing by knew who he was, and today that was exactly the point. Behind the polished glass and gold-lettered signage of behind the velvet benches and marble floors was a question Elijah needed answered. Were his customers still being treated with dignity, regardless of who they were or how they looked? There had been rumors, subtle ones, hints from staff, a complaint too easily dismissed by a regional manager. Elijah needed the truth, not as the CEO, not as the billionaire founder, but as a man walking in off the street with no name, no suit, and no status. Before we go any further, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is, because trust me, you're going to want to stay for what's coming next. He stepped forward, crossing the street with the quiet confidence of someone who owned the world but didn't need to prove it. His black jacket was unbranded. His jeans, clean but plain. His sneakers bore the scuff marks of a man who walked often and deliberately. When he reached the door, he paused. Not because he was nervous, but because he was focused. He pressed a hand to the glass and pushed it open. A soft chime rang overhead. Inside, the air shifted. Colder, controlled, refined. Jazz music played softly in the background, and the scent of expensive cologne drifted through the space like perfume on memory. Elijah had designed this place to feel like a dream, warm, welcoming, elevated. But standing there now, in street clothes, with his face half hidden under a cap, he felt none of that. A woman browsing handbags glanced at him, then away. An employee at the register looked up and blinked once, then returned to typing. No greeting, no offer of assistance, no acknowledgement. So he walked in deeper, heading toward the timepieces. He stood before the watch display, the limited edition collection he had personally approved 6 months earlier. He picked up one of them, a sleek silver piece with a leather strap, and turned it over in his hands, admiring the craftsmanship. It felt familiar, intimate, like shaking hands with a version of himself from the past. But then came the voice. "Can I help you with something?" The tone was flat, polite but hollow. Elijah looked up to find a man approaching from behind the main counter. Mid-50s, graying hair combed neatly, tailored suit just a shade too snug. This was Victor Harlan, the store's franchise owner, someone Elijah had met once long ago when handing over the keys to the brand's flagship location. Clearly, Victor didn't recognize him now. Elijah nodded casually. "Yes, I was wondering about this watch. It's a beautiful piece." Victor walked over, slow and measured, casting a glance at Elijah's shoes, then up to his jacket, and finally meeting his eyes. "That's one of our limited editions," he said, with a rehearsed smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Very exclusive." Elijah tilted his head. "What makes it special?" "It's handcrafted by a Swiss atelier," Victor replied. "Titanium casing, platinum components, extremely rare. Only a handful exist in the world." Elijah nodded thoughtfully. "How much is it?" Victor hesitated. $122,000, he said at last, but he paused carefully. "We do have some more accessible options, if you'd prefer." The silence after that sentence was deafening. Elijah felt the words settle in the space between them like dust. He gave a slow smile, controlled. "Why would I prefer something more accessible?" Victor's eyes sharpened slightly. "Well, we usually ask for proof of funds before showing pieces from this collection. It's just policy, to protect the brand." Elijah placed the watch back down gently. "I see. So customers are vetted before they're allowed to browse?" "We don't mean to offend," Victor said, his voice tightening slightly. "It's about maintaining a certain image. The experience matters." "I understand," Elijah said softly. Then he turned and walked out, leaving the scent of cologne and the polished world behind him. Outside, the wind hit his face again, bracing and cold. His hand reached for the brim of his cap, pulling it off as he exhaled, long and slow. He'd come hoping to be wrong, hoping the rumors were exaggerated, but now he'd seen it for himself, in his own store, by someone carrying his name on their paycheck. This wasn't just a mistake, it was a mindset, and it wasn't going to be ignored. Elijah stood there on the sidewalk, the city rushing past him like it had somewhere more important to be. But he didn't move, not yet. His mind was already turning, sharpening. He'd built this empire on integrity, on respect, on a vision of luxury that welcomed, not judged. If this store had forgotten that, then it was time someone reminded them. The next morning, Elijah Cross returned. Not in a tailored suit, not with an entourage, not even in a different disguise. Same black jacket, same cap, same sneakers. He wanted consistency. He wanted to see if what he'd experienced the day before was an isolated slight, or a symptom of something far worse. This time, he entered the store with quieter resolve, moving past the marble threshold and the familiar chime with barely a glance at the curated displays. He didn't need to marvel at the luxury. He had designed every inch of it. What he needed now was confirmation. Victor Harlan wasn't at the front, but Elijah spotted him near the back, speaking in hushed tones with a woman holding a clipboard. It was Naomi Wells, the assistant manager, her posture slightly tense, her fingers fidgeting with the pen in her hand. Elijah slowed his pace, careful not to draw attention. He hovered by the jewelry section, his eyes on a case of diamond bracelets, delicate, intricately designed, glowing under spotlights like they held their own inner fire. From the corner of his vision, he could see Naomi nodding slowly, her lips pressed into a thin line as Victor leaned in closer. Elijah could hear fragments, just enough to catch the tone and intent. "I don't care if he's browsing. He's not our usual clientele," Victor muttered. "Keep an eye on him." Naomi glanced discreetly toward Elijah's direction. Her expression caught somewhere between duty and discomfort. Their eyes met briefly. Hers widened for a second, but she quickly looked away. Elijah didn't flinch. He simply turned toward the glass and pointed at a necklace, platinum setting, brilliant cut stones, unmistakably high-end. A young sales associate approached, polite but wary, her smile uncertain. "Good morning," Elijah said, offering warmth in his voice. "Could you tell me about this piece?" She nodded, hesitated, then launched into the details. Clarity, carat, craftsmanship. As she spoke, Elijah could feel another presence approaching. He didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Victor's voice sliced into the moment with his usual clipped control. "Is there a problem here?" The associate froze. Elijah turned slowly, calmly. "Not at all. I was simply asking about the necklace." Victor's smile was tight. "This piece is reserved for serious buyers," he said, his tone laced with implication. "We typically don't let just anyone handle it." Elijah's expression remained neutral, but his jaw tightened ever so slightly. "And what makes you think I'm not serious?" Victor took a step closer, lowering his voice. "Experience," he said bluntly. "I've been doing this long enough to know who's here to buy and who's just browsing." The dismissiveness hit harder the second time, not because it was new, but because it was expected. Elijah exhaled slowly. "Let me ask you something," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "How many customers have you dismissed based on how they look? How many have you treated differently because they didn't match your idea of wealth?" Victor didn't answer right away, his eyes narrowed. "I run this store the way it needs to be run," he replied stiffly. "We have a brand to protect, an image to maintain. If that means being selective, so be it." "Selective," Elijah echoed, almost to himself. He looked around. A well-dressed couple was being guided through the showroom with warmth and attention. A sharply dressed man in a suit was offered champagne while trying on a blazer. The contrast was glaring. "It's not about selectivity," Elijah said after a moment. "It's about bias. And you're not just protecting a brand, you're distorting it." Victor bristled. "If you don't like how we operate, there are other stores." Elijah didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked at Naomi, who had stepped slightly closer, as if ready to intervene but unsure how. Then he turned back to Victor, calm as ever. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I've seen what I needed to see." He turned and walked toward the exit again, this time moving with quiet certainty. The chime rang above his head once more, and he stepped back into the morning light. But the air didn't feel fresh. It felt heavy with disappointment. The kind that doesn't come from surprise, but from confirmation. What Elijah had experienced wasn't just one man's arrogance. It was the erosion of everything his company was meant to stand for. Integrity, respect, access without judgment. And if this was happening in his flagship store, it begged a deeper question: how many others? How many Victor Harlans were out there, hiding behind suits and smiles, slowly poisoning a vision Elijah had fought to build? He walked for blocks without stopping, his mind turning like gears locked in motion. Every slight, every condescending word, every averted gaze, it wasn't just personal, it was structural, and now it needed to be dismantled, piece by piece. There would be no third visit. The next time he returned, it wouldn't be as a stranger in disguise. It would be as Elijah Cross, the man who built this empire, and he was coming back with answers, consequences, and a mission to clean house. Elijah Cross didn't return to the store the following day. Instead, he walked into the glass tower that bore his company's name, Cross and Co. headquarters, nestled in the heart of Midtown Manhattan. The building gleamed beneath the morning sun, its walls reflecting both the city's grandeur and Elijah's quiet resolve. He moved through the lobby with the calm of a man who belonged, nodding once at the receptionist before stepping into the elevator. As he ascended, floor by floor, he rehearsed nothing. He didn't need to. Every word he planned to say had been forged in the fire of humiliation and disappointment. This wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. At the top floor, Elijah entered the executive conference room, sleek, high-ceilinged, wrapped in floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of New York's skyline. He took his place at the head of the long, polished table. He had summoned Victor Harlan under the guise of a standard performance review, something that wouldn't raise suspicion. If Victor thought he was walking into a routine check-in, Elijah wanted it that way. He wanted the man disarmed. Mia Torres, Elijah's sharp and composed executive assistant, stood by the door, checking her tablet until she glanced up. "He's here," she said softly. Elijah nodded once. "Send him in." The door opened, and Victor stepped inside, wearing the same smug confidence Elijah had seen in the store. His suit was pressed, his tie tight and conservative, his smile artificial. "Good morning," Victor said, glancing around. "I wasn't expecting a direct meeting with you, Mr. Cross. Everything all right?" Elijah didn't smile. "Take a seat." Victor's brow creased slightly as he moved toward the chair across the table. He sat, folding his hands loosely, trying to mask the confusion slowly seeping into his expression. Elijah leaned forward slightly. "Let's talk about your store." "Of course," Victor said quickly. "Sales are up. Our holiday projections look strong. The product line you approved last quarter has been performing." "This isn't about sales," Elijah interrupted. "This is about something far more important, something you've clearly forgotten: how we treat people." Victor blinked. "I don't follow." Elijah's gaze didn't waver. "I visited your store 2 days ago. You didn't recognize me because I didn't want you to. I came as a customer, dressed in jeans and a jacket. I asked you about a watch. Later, I returned and asked about a necklace. Both times you looked me in the eye and decided I didn't belong." Victor's face turned pale. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again. I didn't know it was you. I never would have." "That's the problem," Elijah said, his voice firm but steady. "You shouldn't need to know who someone is to treat them with basic decency. You dismissed me. You assumed I couldn't afford anything. You directed your staff to keep an eye on me like I was a threat." The silence between them grew heavy, charged with the weight of truth. Mr. Cross, please, Victor finally said, his voice laced with panic. If I had known, I swear. But you didn't, Elijah cut in sharply. And that's exactly why this meeting is happening. Because if that's how you treat me, I can only imagine how many others you've made feel small, unworthy, invisible. That behavior doesn't represent my company. It undermines everything we've built. Victor leaned forward, desperation creeping into his eyes. I can change. I'll go through any training you want. I'll apologize. Elijah shook his head slowly. It's not just about one incident, Victor. It's about a mindset. One I've seen you cling to. One that's incompatible with the values of this company. Effective immediately, your franchise agreement is terminated. You are no longer affiliated with Cross & Co. You'll be escorted out by security, and legal will follow up with the necessary paperwork. Victor's face fell. He looked stunned, betrayed, as if this was somehow an overreaction. You can't be serious, he whispered. I've run that store for years. I built its reputation. You built a facade, Elijah said coldly. One that excluded people based on appearance. One that eroded the very foundation of what this company stands for. Respect, dignity, and inclusion. Victor stood abruptly, anger replacing disbelief. This is a mistake. You'll regret this. Elijah stood too, his expression unmoved. No, Victor. The mistake was trusting you to carry my name without understanding what it meant. Mia stepped forward, signaling security quietly through her earpiece. Victor stared at Elijah for a final moment, then turned and stormed out, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. Elijah watched him go, not with satisfaction, but with resolve. This wasn't about punishment. It was about course correction. About making sure no one else walked into that store and felt what he had felt, dismissed, judged, unworthy. When the door finally closed, Elijah turned to Mia. Make sure the transition process starts today. Contact the assistant manager at the store. Naomi Wells? Mia asked. Yes, Elijah replied. I want her here tomorrow morning. We have work to do. Mia nodded. I'll take care of it. Elijah walked to the windows, gazing out at the city he loved and the company he'd built. Today marked the first step in something bigger. Not just accountability, but restoration. And it was only the beginning. The following morning, Elijah Cross sat alone in the same sunlit conference room where, just the day before, he had confronted and removed Victor Harlan from the company. The energy in the room had shifted. It no longer buzzed with confrontation, but with anticipation. He stared out over the Manhattan skyline, hands clasped in front of him, not as a man burdened by what had happened, but as one determined to shape what came next. The door opened quietly behind him, and Naomi Wells stepped in. Her posture was straight, but her expression carried a mixture of nerves and quiet resolve. Dressed in a modest navy blouse and charcoal skirt, she looked every bit the professional. But beneath the surface, Elijah saw something deeper. Someone who had endured, observed, and waited. Good morning, Ms. Wells, he said warmly, standing to greet her. Thank you for coming. Naomi nodded, her voice calm but respectful. Of course, Mr. Cross. I wasn't sure what to expect when I got your message. Elijah gestured for her to sit. I wanted to speak with you directly. After what I saw at the store, it's clear to me you've been working under a leadership style that didn't align with this company's values. Naomi's eyes flickered with something. Relief, perhaps, or the early uncoiling of guarded tension. I've always tried to do my job with integrity, she said. But Victor had his way of doing things, and most of the time there wasn't room to question it. Elijah nodded slowly. I noticed that. I also noticed how you carried yourself even under pressure. You didn't contribute to the disrespect, but you didn't reinforce it either. You observed, you listened, and I believe you can lead. Naomi's eyes widened slightly, unsure she had heard him correctly. Lead? Yes, Elijah said plainly. I'm offering you the position of interim store manager, effective immediately. We'll reassess in 6 months, but right now, I need someone I trust to reshape that store into what it was meant to be." Naomi blinked, stunned. I don't know what to say. I never thought I'd—" "Say yes," Elijah interrupted gently. "Say yes, and help me make sure no one ever walks into that store and feels like they don't belong." For a long moment, Naomi said nothing. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Yes, Mr. Cross, I'll do it. I won't let you down." Elijah smiled, the first real smile he'd worn in days. "That's exactly what I needed to hear." From there, they dove into plans, training sessions, staff reviews, new hiring standards, and an emphasis on inclusive service. Elijah made it clear. This wasn't about blaming the staff. It was about rebuilding trust and raising expectations. "You're not just a manager," he said. "You're the beginning of a cultural shift. People will look to you not just for instruction, but for example." Naomi straightened in her seat, determination solidifying in her posture. "Then I'll be the example," she said. "I know the team. I know what needs to change, and I know how to make it happen." As their meeting ended, Elijah escorted her to the elevator himself. "You won't be alone in this," he said. "You'll have my full support and my presence when needed, but I trust your judgment on the ground." Naomi nodded, her confidence now visible in the way she carried herself. "Thank you for believing in me." When the elevator doors closed and she was gone, Elijah returned to the window, looking out over the city. The removal of Victor had been a necessary first act, but this appointment of Naomi, was the real beginning. A store was only as strong as the people who shaped it, and Naomi Wells wasn't just capable, she was the future. She understood that luxury wasn't about exclusion. It was about how you made people feel the moment they walked through the door. Elijah felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he hadn't even realized he'd been holding. Change was coming, not cosmetic, not symbolic, but foundational. And with the right leadership in place, it would start taking root faster than anyone expected. Two days later, Elijah Cross entered a different kind of room. Not a boardroom of executives, but a private meeting space inside the company headquarters now filled with the staff from the Fifth Avenue store. They had been brought in quietly, one by one, unsure of what exactly was happening. Faces were tense, curious, even anxious. Whispers had circulated after Victor's abrupt exit, but no one had answers. Naomi Wells stood at the front with a clipboard in hand, her demeanor calm and prepared. She glanced at Elijah as he walked in, and he gave her a brief nod of encouragement. The murmurs quieted as he stepped forward and looked out at the room. Familiar faces, hard-working people, some newer, some who had been with the company since the early days. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice steady but warm. "I know this isn't a typical day, and I want to be transparent with you about what's happening. As many of you already know, Victor Harlan is no longer with Cross & Company." A flicker of surprise moved through the group. Some eyes widened, others exchanged quiet glances, but no one spoke. Elijah continued. "His departure wasn't about numbers or sales. It was about something deeper, how we treat people. I recently visited the store, not as your CEO, but as a regular customer. And what I experienced was disappointing. I was judged based on my appearance. I was dismissed, questioned, and made to feel like I didn't belong. And if that can happen to me, I have to wonder how many others it's happened to." He let the words sit for a moment, letting the silence carry their weight. This company was built on the belief that luxury doesn't have to mean exclusion, that respect is not reserved for a certain look, income, or accent. We don't just sell products, we shape experiences. And every single person who walks through those doors deserves to feel welcomed, seen, and valued. Naomi stepped beside him now, her tone clear and unwavering. "As the new interim store manager, I'll be working closely with each of you to ensure that standard becomes a reality, not just in policy, but in practice." Starting next week, we'll begin a new round of staff training focused on inclusive service, cultural awareness, and conflict resolution. This isn't about pointing fingers, it's about evolving together. A young sales associate, Tyler Brooks, raised his hand. What exactly will the training look like? Are we being evaluated? Naomi smiled slightly. It'll be interactive, workshops, role-playing, real-world scenarios. And yes, we'll be observing, but not to punish. We want to support you in becoming the best versions of yourselves professionally. You're not here by accident. You were hired because you have potential, and we're here to nurture that, not tear it down. Another hand went up. Kayla Reed, one of the cashiers. What happens if a customer behaves the way Victor did, if they treat us or others unfairly? Elijah stepped back in. That's a great question. Discrimination doesn't always come from behind the counter. If anyone, customer or colleague, acts in a way that violates our values, you have every right to speak up. Naomi and I are here to protect your dignity, just as much as our clients. You are not powerless in those situations. You are the front line, and you deserve to feel safe, respected, and supported. The atmosphere in the room began to shift. Subtle at first, but undeniable. Postures relaxed, eyes lifted. Tension began to give way to cautious optimism. For many of them, this was the first time they had seen the CEO in person. For all of them, it was the first time they'd heard him speak not about profit or expansion, but about people. I know change can feel unsettling, Elijah continued, but it can also be the start of something powerful. I'm not here to shame anyone. I'm here to rebuild trust. What happened with Victor was unfortunate, but it was also a wake-up call. We can't afford to look the other way when people are being treated unfairly. Not in this company. Not in this world. Naomi concluded the meeting with clear next steps. Training schedules, open-door sessions for questions, and the invitation to come to her directly with concerns or ideas. When the meeting ended, staff didn't rush out. Many stayed behind, chatting with one another, asking Naomi follow-up questions, even thanking Elijah for his honesty. As he watched them, he felt a small but vital shift in the air. Accountability had sparked something stronger than fear. It had sparked pride, and that was the foundation he was hoping for. The store wasn't fixed overnight, but now it had direction, and for the first time in a long while, so did the people inside it. Two weeks later, without notice or fanfare, Elijah Cross walked through the doors of the Fifth Avenue store he had once felt like a stranger in. The chime above the entrance rang just as it always had, but this time it greeted him like a familiar voice rather than a cold formality. He wore the same outfit as before, black jacket, jeans, understated sneakers, but now the energy around him was different. As he stepped inside, he was met not with suspicion or silence, but with warmth. Tyler Brooks was the first to spot him, and without hesitation he stepped forward, extending a genuine smile. "Good morning, sir. Welcome to Cross & Co. Let us know if there's anything you need today." Elijah nodded in quiet approval and shook the young man's hand. "You're doing a fine job, Tyler." The associate blinked in surprise, then smiled even wider. "Thank you, Mr. Cross." Around the showroom, the changes were clear. Staff were engaged, attentive, and moving with a shared rhythm that felt collaborative, not performative. Customers browsed freely, some with obvious means, others just admiring, and everyone was treated the same. Naomi Wells emerged from the back in the middle of assisting a guest, but when she caught sight of Elijah, she gave a small nod of acknowledgement before finishing the conversation and walking over. "Mr. Cross," she said, her voice calm and composed but with a hint of pride, "you didn't say you were coming by today." "That was the point," he replied. "I wanted to see things exactly as they are." Naomi gestured around the space. "We're still working through some of the training cycles, but the response has been better than I expected. Staff feel heard. They're talking to each other more, helping each other more. Customers have left reviews saying the store feels more welcoming, less intimidating. Some said it was the first time they didn't feel judged the moment they walked in." Elijah smiled at that, a slow, genuine smile that reached his eyes. That's exactly the kind of feedback I want to hear. Their conversation was cut short by the unmistakable chime of the front door opening again. Both turned to see who had entered. Elijah's expression shifted. So did Naomi's. Standing in the doorway, looking smaller than the last time either of them had seen him, was Victor Harlan. He wasn't in a fresh suit this time. His blazer looked worn. His eyes tired. There was no arrogance in his step, just hesitation. He looked around the store, saw the staff, the customers, and finally his gaze landed on Elijah. For a moment he didn't move. Then, slowly, he walked toward them. "Mr. Cross," he said, his voice quieter than it had ever been. "Naomi." Naomi gave a cautious nod but said nothing. Elijah remained still, unreadable. "I'm not here to make a scene," Victor continued. "I just needed to say something, if that's all right." Elijah gave a slight nod, his jaw tight. "You have 1 minute." Victor swallowed, then took a breath. "I've had time to think, a lot of time. What I did, how I treated people, it wasn't just wrong. It was ugly. I was so focused on protecting an image, I forgot what the brand was supposed to stand for. I disrespected customers, dismissed good staff, and I let my ego lead instead of my conscience. I thought being right mattered more than being fair. I was wrong." He looked at Naomi now. "I owe you an apology, too. You tried to steer things in the right direction, and I shut you down every time. You were right. You were always right." Naomi didn't speak, but her posture softened slightly. Victor turned back to Elijah. "I know I don't deserve to be here. I know I've burned that bridge, but I just wanted you to know I'm trying to change. I needed to say that." Elijah studied him for a long moment. There was no rage in his eyes, no bitterness, just the measured silence of a man who had seen the cost of both failure and redemption. Finally, he spoke. "Thank you for saying that," he said. "I hope you carry those words into your next chapter, because this one is closed." Victor nodded slowly, accepting the answer without protest. "I understand, and I wish you both the best." With that, he turned and walked out the same door he once owned, disappearing into the crowd. Naomi exhaled softly beside Elijah. "Thank you," she said. If he'd come back, the staff would have been shaken. They needed closure. We all did. Elijah looked around the store once more. "You've done something special here, Naomi, and this is just the beginning." As they stood together, surrounded by the gentle hum of renewed purpose, Elijah felt what he hadn't the first time he walked in: peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because everything was finally moving in the right direction. In the weeks that followed, Elijah Cross continued to visit the Fifth Avenue store regularly, often without notice, sometimes just to observe from a quiet corner. Each time he walked through those glass doors, the atmosphere felt lighter, more human. The polished elegance of the space had not changed. The marble floors still gleamed. The curated displays still stood under precise lighting. But something far more important had shifted: the spirit inside. Staff greeted customers with genuine smiles, not rehearsed politeness. Associates assisted without prejudice, not once scanning someone's shoes or coat to judge their worth. Naomi Wells had fully stepped into her role as manager, not just organizing schedules and managing inventory, but actively shaping the store's culture. She had implemented peer mentorships, hosted weekly roundtable discussions where employees shared customer stories, both good and bad, and even created a suggestion box where ideas were read aloud each Monday morning. Elijah watched from a distance as young team members like Tyler Brooks grew more confident, while veterans like Kayla Reed found their voices in ways they hadn't under Victor's rule. What had once been a rigid hierarchy was now a team, aligned not just by uniform, but by shared values. Word began to spread, not just among customers, but across the company. Other store managers reached out to Naomi for guidance. One by one, regional leaders scheduled calls with Elijah, asking how they could replicate the transformation. It was no longer about damage control. It had become a model. Elijah didn't rush the process. He wasn't interested in rolling out a corporate script or issuing mandates from the top. He knew change had to start where people interacted, in the fitting rooms, at the counters, on the floor. So he listened. He spent time with staff at all levels. He invited feedback, asked difficult questions, and challenged every assumption about what luxury truly meant. And in doing so, he began to redefine not just his company, but the legacy he would one day leave behind. One evening, after a long day of site visits and internal meetings, Elijah returned to his office and stood by the window, looking out at the city that had both tested and inspired him. The skyline shimmered under the setting sun, and for the first time in months he didn't feel the weight of disappointment, but the lift of direction. His phone buzzed on the desk behind him, a message from Naomi. "Just had a customer tell me this is the first luxury store where they felt at home. Thought you'd want to hear that." Elijah smiled. He didn't reply immediately. He let the moment sit. It wasn't just praise, it was proof. Proof that the pain, the confrontation, the uncomfortable truth, all of it had been necessary. Growth, after all, rarely came without friction. And leadership wasn't about avoiding discomfort. It was about stepping into it with clarity and conviction. A few days later, he held a quiet ceremony. Not publicized, not formal, where he presented Naomi with a plaque recognizing her for outstanding leadership and her promotion to full store manager. The team applauded, not out of obligation, but with genuine pride. Naomi didn't give a speech, just a short, heartfelt thank you, followed by her promise to keep listening, keep learning, and keep building a space where everyone belongs. That, Elijah thought, was leadership in its purest form. No ego, no performance, just purpose. As the store returned to its usual rhythm, Elijah stood by the entrance for a moment, watching as an elderly couple walked in hand and were greeted with the same respect as a man in a designer suit. A teenage girl asked about a necklace and was shown the display with warmth, not condescension. No one was watching. No one was performing. They were just doing it right. Elijah stepped outside into the cool air, the city buzzing around him as always. But something inside him had quieted. Not the fire, he would always carry that, but the unrest. He had done what leaders must do: confront the cracks, name the harm, and rebuild not just the structure, but the soul. As he walked away from the store, he didn't look back. He didn't need to. What mattered most wasn't behind him anymore. It was ahead, in every employee who now saw their job as a chance to elevate others, and in every customer who would walk through those doors and feel, for the first time, that they truly belonged. And that, Elijah Cross knew, was the kind of legacy worth leaving. If this story moved you or made you think differently about leadership, respect, or the power of change, drop a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done in Elijah's shoes? And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story. More powerful journeys are coming, and you'll want to be here for every one of them.